And now, can I ask you all please to put your hands together and give a fabulous Ballina welcome to our guests here today, Mary Robinson, Olivia O'Leary, and our special guest for today, Kumi Naidoo. Thank you very much.
I want to welcome everyone here today. We're delighted to have you here today to join us and welcome our guest of honour, Kumi Naidoo, here to Ballina on the banks of the River Moy for the 5th International Human Rights Lecture in the Mary Robinson, or hopefully soon to be the Mary Robinson Centre across the river. It is on the banks of this very river that Mary Robinson, then Mary Burke, grew up in the middle of she was one of 5 children to Dr. Audrey and Teresa Burke. And it's like that experience of growing up as the middle girl that Mary often attributed to her lifelong passion for justice, equality, and fairness. I see Adrian here, her brother. What did you do to her? The drive to give voice and fight for equality led to an illustrious career that transformed many aspects of Irish society, from gender equality to gay rights to a modern presidency, leading to a global career as a powerful ambassador for human rights, gender equality, and climate justice. We've now turned a full circle with the house that Mary grew up in being transformed as we speak to create a centre of education, learning and research, where Mary's work can spark a passion in young people in Ballina and around the world via the Mary Robinson Centre. The centre is an important development for Ballina, and I know a lot of you coming in through the reception area or the hall here at the front would have seen the map and the actual drawings that's been done. And I see a young man down there called Kevin Keegan, who's been very involved as the architect on that project. And just, Kevin, would you mind standing up if you don't mind? I just want to acknowledge the work that he's done on it. And not alone that, but also this building you're actually in here today was one of Kevin's favourite pet projects. This really is a fantastic event, and I want to acknowledge all the work that people who have put this together. It takes a lot to put something like this, as we see today, to have such distinguished guests as we have here presently. I want to say thank you for them for coming. It really means a lot to Ballina to have you here, and thank you very, very much. There's other distinguished guests in the audience as well. I'm not going to mention them all by name. I had the pleasure of meeting some of them early on today. But this afternoon, for those people who haven't been from this area, I mean, it's great to see you here, and I hope you come back soon again to us. It means to this area, we had other voices last weekend. Now we have this event tonight. And this is what it's all about for us in the Ballina area, is to bring people, new people and old friends back. And that's what I'm delighted to see here tonight, or this afternoon. So just want to say well done to everybody involved, and I hope this weekend, this day will be a positive day for everybody, and I hope you get something out of it. Thank you very, very, very much.
You'd miss our MC. Terry, unfortunately, is absent, can't be with us. It's the first of the lectures that he's missed, and he would be the continuity and the joke teller, which I'm not, by the way. While I'm those it's great to be here. It is a fantastic occasion, and it's a great honour and privilege on behalf of Mayo County Council as Chief Executive to join with the Cathaoirleach in that Fíorfáilte. Everyone is welcome. Cathaoirleach has welcomed people individually and collectively, and I think we just need to add our welcome to the person who's probably travelled the longest distance to be with us. That's our kind of guest speaker and guest of honour. That's Kumi Naidoo. Wanted to take the opportunity very briefly, and Michael has done some of it. By the way, when it comes to giving out to staff and embarrassing the lead architect on the project, that's usually my job, but thank you for acknowledging the exceptional work that's been done there. I did want to take the opportunity to say a few words about the Mary Robinson Centre, and it is great to see it emerging from the earth, as it were, on the side of the river. There's a real kind of hope thing going on there. Maybe spring is around the corner. God knows, after the winter we've had and what we've been through and what we're facing into, hope is really important. So it's great to see it. It's taken some time to get here, a little longer maybe than would have been predicted at the start. But I think we have a stronger and a better project for the time that's been spent on it, and I'm certainly looking forward to seeing it move on with pace from here. I'd like to add some thanks to the Cathaoirleach's thanks. That's to, firstly, our local stakeholders, and I know Derek will speak to that later on, so I'm not going to elaborate too much there. To our local elected representatives, both in the council municipal district here and in the council in Castlebar. To our Oireachtas members, Dara and Machel were particularly strong advocates at a particularly important time, and it was supported by all of the other Oireachtas members as well. Rose Conway-Walsh, Minister Ring, and Taoiseach Enda Kenny in his day were all champions of the project. Project manager Susan Heffernan has stuck with the project through tough times and good times and has done a remarkable job, as has our board chairperson, Emer Gilvari, and the other board members. Emer, unfortunately, stepped down after a long and illustrious career with Mason Hayes and Kern about 10 days ago, I think. And she's been honoured at a function in Dublin as we speak. She will be checking in on Facebook occasionally, so hi Emer. And she did a remarkable job in getting us to this point. So to all of those people and to everyone who got us here, can I just say, Graça. Can I also at this juncture acknowledge the generosity of Mary, Nick and the Robinson family. Without their vision, without their commitment to the project over a long period, and without the absolute generosity that they've shown by putting this extremely valuable, arguably priceless archive into the public domain for the common good, none of us would be here. So Mary, Nick and family, Gormagav Shifreshen. Now, briefly, you should never lose an opportunity to market and promote. So what is the Mary Robinson Centre all about? It is not a museum. We clarified that last weekend at the Other Voices seminar here when we had some people from Dublin who might have had that opinion in the past. It's most definitely not. What it is, it's a little bit of museum and display about it, but it is, firstly, it's a place of celebration. It's a place to celebrate a lifetime's work, a lifetime's achievement, and a legacy which stands there with a legacy among any Irish person, certainly in modern times. This county, and I know I speak for everyone in this room, are very proud of our townswoman, our countywoman, Mary Robinson, and we are going to celebrate that pride in the Mary Robinson Centre. Second, it's going to be a place of inspiration. At least we hope it's going to be a place of inspiration, as Michael said. Anyone excuse me, who came in down the steps here would have seen the power of the River Moy. Couldn't help but be inspired by the awesome power of nature, as Agnes Moran Bernard was when she looked over the bridge, a relative of Mary's, in the years 1891-92. Asked a question last weekend at the seminar, and that is short version. What do Michael Davitt, John Lennon and Mary Robinson have in common? They've got Mayo in common. They've got a vision in common. They've got a view of the world in common. Not sure if rebel is a word that Mary would like to be totally associated with, but most definitely all three were champions of change. All three were not champions of the status quo. And all three made a global impact. So there is definitely a Mayo spirit. And we'd like to see that Mayo spirit being a source of inspiration for all who come to the Mary Robinson Centre here in Ballina. And the third thing it's going to be is a place of learning. And to that end, the involvement of NUIG has been absolutely crucial. And I'd like to acknowledge the generosity of that involvement on the part of both the President O'Hagerty, and President Brown, who kicked the whole venture off 7-8 years ago at this stage. And we're delighted to be joined by both Professor Siobhan Mullally and John Cox, who will be tasked with taking that collaboration with NUIG forward, and will, I know, be building on the connections with Georgetown University and with Harvard and with other third-level institutions from this town into the future. You're both very welcome. So the MRC, as we come to know it in shorthand, the Mary Robinson Centre, is about the future. It's about leading a conversation to deal with the challenges that we face, challenges like global warming, climate justice, women's leadership, and the odd unexpected challenge that's going to come around the corner, like the odd virus. And we haven't seen a meteor for a couple of thousand years, and God knows we won't see them too. So the future is uncertain, and it needs leadership, it needs guidance, and it needs inspiration. That's what the Mary Robinson Centre is about. And we want to think that that future is going to be shaped to some extent, at least, from here in Mayo. Now, my next and final job is to introduce the facilitator for this afternoon's conversation. We all know that the best thinking comes from the edge, and that's why Mayo and that spirit of Mayo being on the edge has established the heritage and the thought processes that it has. But the Pale has got some good points too. There's a little county called Carlow. It's a little gem, beautiful. And introducing the next person, I told her beforehand, gave warning, she's going to be introduced as my second favourite Carlow person. That puts her immediately after my late dad, God rest him. So she gets between my dad and my granny, which is not a bad ranking. She's not quite perhaps as famous or as notorious as Diarmuid MacMurrough Kavanagh, who also came from Borris and started a conversation some 800 years ago, which is still being worked through. Hope that the conversation this afternoon doesn't go on for 800 years, but I do hope that it's challenging and interesting and motivating. She's one of our best known TV personalities, one of our most distinguished journalists, and it's a great pleasure to have her back. Would you welcome, please, Olivia O'Leary.
Thank you, Peter, and commiserations on being only half a Carlow person. We're going to be hearing in a moment from our guest speaker, and then we're going to have some discussion and questions from the audience. But just before I go to say the few words of introduction, I wanted to say that we arrived at Euston this morning to take the 7:30 train, and Mary'd organised tickets for all of us, so we all sat together and everything. And I said, that's great, I said, but you know, we probably wouldn't have had any problem. I mean, the 7:30 train to Westport and Ballina is hardly going to be that crowded. And Mary said, and why not? Do you think that it's only Dublin people want to go to? And I realised I had said the wrong thing. So and the train was crowded, by the way. With all the other things that Mary is, she's a proud Ballina woman. I need to say no more. Our guest of honour is Kumi Naidoo today. Kumi's been a human rights and climate justice activist all of his life. He was born in South Africa of Indian descent and battled against apartheid in the 70s and 80s, was arrested and jailed, went into exile in Britain, where he started and later finished an education at Oxford, where he took a PhD in political sociology. In post-apartheid South Africa, he was involved in literacy and education campaigns. He's always stressed the importance of active citizenship, and in the early 2000s, he was CEO of Civicus, the World Alliance for Citizen Participation. He was the first African head of Greenpeace. He was subsequently Secretary General of Amnesty International until December of last year. He has never seen, and I think this is really interesting about him, he's never seen the battles for human rights and for climate justice as two separate causes. He's always seen the survival and the health of the planet as central to ensuring justice for all of us who live on that planet. Would you please welcome Kumi Naidoo.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Olivia. Dear friends, colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, my dear brothers and sisters, I must confess that these days when I get in front of an audience, I'm much more nervous than when I was 15 years old because of many reasons, but one of them being, and the best way I can do it is just tell you this incident that happened to me speaking in the United States, and I was talking about the moment of world history that we find ourselves in, and in this moment where you can call it a time of global moral panic, right? By the way, I was saying this before coronavirus, and I would say 4 trends capture the moment of history that we're in. 1, rising authoritarian rulers. Secondly, deepening inequality or the rise of oligarchic wealth. Thirdly, global xenophobia. You know, it's not just like in one country now, xenophobia has become a norm in too many places. And of course, the existential crisis of climate change. So as I was talking through this, I could see people in the audience getting more and more depressed, as a few of you are getting. And when it came to the question and answer time, a woman put up a hand and said, Dr. Naidoo, have you heard of Martin Luther King? And I said, yes, he inspired me and very many people in my country during our struggle against apartheid. And then she said, do you know what his most famous speech was called? Anybody? So I was thinking it a trick question, so I said it very gently. I said, I have a dream? And she shouted back at me, she said, yes! It was I Have a Dream, but when I hear you speak, it sounds like you have a nightmare. The forests are collapsing, the oceans are rising, the inequality is deepening and so on. I start with this point because I think one of the most important leadership challenges that we face right now, whether you run a small grassroots community-based organization or whether you run a big international organization or if you're a head of state, is finding the capability to speak to people with honesty, do not sanitize the fact that humanity is currently in a deep, deep crisis, but to do that in a way that does not send a message that it's too late, what's the point of getting involved, that demotivates and kind of gets people to be disillusioned. This is not an easy challenge of the moment, because whenever you say just how close to the cliff we are in terms of climate, for example, the end result is people say, oh, you're scaremongering and so on. So I would put that as one of the key challenges that we face at a time when we are seeing a convergence of different crises. Today, the crises are not like standalone crises. They're all connected and infusing each other in quite powerful ways. Now, I want to say, before I go further, that how deep an honor it is and a privilege for me, and a joy actually, to be here in Mary's hometown. And I'm sorry, I can't call him president and so on, because Mary is one of my very, very, very best friends in the world. We have worked together for about 20 years now. We've done some strange, crazy things together. Like, for example, in September last year, We were in Iceland, and our job was, we went there to construct a memorial, to open a memorial for the first glacier in the world that died, completely finito. And Mary was there on a Sunday morning with her walking gear and all to climb a high mountain. And I looked at her and I said, I'm not sure I'm going to make it. And now Mary's going to make it. But she confidently was about to start. And then after that, people said, Mary, you've done enough. You can take a break. You don't have to go up the mountain. But I want to just say that Mary is, everybody in this audience and me, we have one thing in common. And that is, you come from a country and I come from a country where we can say that we had a leader who wasn't crazy, who we loved, who did good things, and was not only loved at home, but was loved abroad. I have that in Nelson Mandela, and you have that in Mary Robinson. But I just want to reflect on this challenge that we have about seeing things in silos and put it again in a story. When I started at Greenpeace, and I did interviews in my first week, most of the journalists around the world were asking, so, Mr. Naidoo, you seem to have given up and turned your back on anti-poverty activism, gender equality, and democracy for the environment. And I was taken aback by that question, and I said that my answer to all those interviews was the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change and environmental collapse, and the struggle to address poverty, inequality, and various challenges that humanity faces must, can, and should be seen as two sides of the same coin. And one of the reasons we are in such a deep crisis right now is the failure of leadership to listen to what the feminist movement gave us decades ago, when the feminist movement gave us a very powerful concept, but a rather cumbersome word, when they said what we need is intersectionality. Meaning, if you want to advance gender equality, you needed to understand how gender intersected with race, class, ability, religion, and so on. And that is what is critically needed if we are going to avert the climate crisis. But the problem is, we've got a real huge problem of denial, right? We've got very powerful leaders who have, like Donald Trump, who have the capability to do good to actually address this challenge that we have, and we're not getting there. Now, if I can just go back to where I started, with that audience in the US, and I want to say to you, there is some good news in the fact that things are so bad, and that is, you probably heard people like me at some point, and I'm sure you've heard Mary say it, save the planet, save the environment, save the climate. I want to just share with you some really good news. The planet is just fine. The planet does not need saving. Because think about it. If we continue on the path that we're on, what would happen? We warm the planet to a point where, as we are doing, we deplete our water resources, which humanity needs for survival. We deplete our soil, and then what you have, incapability to generate food. And then we have a warming planet where in parts of the world, like where I come from, we just won't be able to survive just in terms of the rising heat. So the end result is, we will be gone, the planet will still be here. And the good news is, once we become extinct as a species, the forests will recover, the oceans will replenish, and so on. So don't worry about the planet. Understand the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change is nothing more and nothing less than protecting our children and their children's futures. And it is pathetic that so many of our political and business leaders are dragging the feet when our children are crying across the world for action. In fact, one of the most inspiring things that we've seen is the Fridays for the Future movement that was initiated by Greta Thunberg. And when you talk to these young kids, you know what they are saying? They're saying, listen, our parents at home, they tell us, don't go into the kitchen, when the stove is on, stay far away from the stove because you're going to get burnt. Now, our entire house is on fire, and our parents don't have the capability to get our political and business leaders to make the changes as fast as we need them to make it. So we've got a real problem of getting an acceptance that we are running out of time, because according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, we now have 10 years to get emissions to peak and start coming down drastically if we are to avert catastrophic climate change. Now, the sad reality is hundreds of thousands of people have died and will continue to die or have their livelihoods completely devastated. But the people that are paying the first and most brutal price for climate impacts are not the ones that actually have contributed to it. In fact, they are some of the lowest emitters. In fact, they don't have fridges, they don't have cars, they don't have electricity, and so on. But they are the ones that are being hit. And by the way, interestingly, even in rich countries like the United States, when you look at Hurricane Katrina, Hurricane Sandy, and so on, when you look at it, even when it hits rich countries at the moment, the people that pay the most painful price are the poor, the working class, and people of color. And let's understand that the situation we find ourselves is not simply an environmental problem. It's as a result of greed, as a result of us unable to share the resources of the planet in a more equitable way, and it is something that is within our capability to change. Mary, often when we share panels together, she says 3 very simple things to summarize the problem on climate change. One is, the problem, she says correctly, is much worse than we think it is. Secondly, the problem is getting worse much faster than we think it is. But importantly, the third point is, it is within human skill, ingenuity, creativity right now, and technological capability that we have what it takes to make this big transition. But what is lacking desperately right now is political will. And that political will, the good news is, political will is a renewable resource. You know, we can kick them out of office, and then sometimes you can spend months and months waiting for them to figure out who's going to be the new government. But the good news is, political leaders are not, irrespective of how powerful they think they are not beyond the pressure of citizens. And when we look at what the young people have done, is they have brought a moral dimension to that public conversation. And by the way, their slogans and all are much more sharper than even the most well-known advertising agencies that you might contract to do a campaign for you. I was marching down Downing Street with them last year, and as we went past, Downing Street, 2 young girls pick up the sign, that's where the cabinet meets, right? And they said, you can get better cabinets at IKEA than what you get in there. And I just want to stop there for a second to say that part of our challenge of building the kind of energized citizenry that we need is not about seeing the moment that we're in as a moment of doom and gloom, because if we see that, we'll drag everybody down. And when Amnesty International recently gave the highest honor that it gives, called the Ambassador of Conscience Award, when we gave it to Fridays for the Future and Graça, this was my message to them as I handed over the award. I said, please do not allow those political and business leaders that are in denial and that are holding us back, please do not allow them to completely take away your entire childhood. You have a right to laugh, to play sport, to continue to love each other, promote happiness, and so on. And yes, find that right balance between fighting for your future as well as being a child. Because, people ask me sometimes, what, do you have any deep regret about, or anger and so on, about having got involved as a 15-year-old activist? And I say, no anger, no regret. But there is some sadness, I will be honest with you. Some sadness that are lost, like many, many people my age at that time, we lost our childhood so quickly. And that's not a good thing. And that's why, while encouraging the young people to participate and so on, we need to also be ensuring that they are having as normal a future as possible. What is critically needed if we are to avert catastrophic climate change is that we need to change the narratives of how we understand the moment that we are. And I want to be blunt with you. The status quo that we have is completely broken. It's beyond incremental improvements and so on. It needs to be fundamentally changed. And I want to draw on the wisdom from Martin Luther King. Speaking in the mid-60s, he said, "My friends, as I come to the end of my speech, I want to note that in the field of modern child psychology, there's a very dominant term called maladjusted. Now, all of us want to live a well-adjusted life and not suffer from schizophrenia or other mental illnesses. But my friends, I say to you, there are certain things in this world that are so unjust and immoral that good, decent people should refuse to be well-adjusted to." He goes on to say, "I never intend to adjust myself to religious bigotry. I never intend to adjust myself to racial discrimination." And importantly, he says, on the economy, he says, "I never intend to adjust myself to economic conditions that will take necessities from the many to give luxuries to the few when millions of God's children are smothering in an airtight cage of poverty in an affluent society." Unquote. If that was valid in the United States in the mid-60s, that is 1,000,000 times more valid in the United States today and is equally valid across the world today. We live on one planet. And WWF said more than 15 years ago that if everybody in the world is to live, for example, how the average lifestyle is in Europe, we would need 3 to 5 planets. So we have to begin to think very seriously about what constitutes a decent, meaningful, happy life. And here I want to suggest that one of the biggest diseases we have in the world today is not influenza or not coronavirus, but it's a disease we could call affluenza. That is a pathological illness that people have believing that a good, decent, meaningful life comes from more and more and more material acquisitions. And we have to break that because, sadly, the reality is the world we live and the world we're going to today. There are many children in Africa today that will have a better chance to survive the world ahead if we don't make the changes that we need than the average child in Europe. What do I mean by that? If we do not get this right, if you think today we have problems, we have violence, we have conflict and so on, if we do not act urgently within the next 10 years and make these changes, what we face today, I'm sorry to say, will look like a Sunday morning picnic than what is actually waiting for us. So, as I conclude then, let me draw your attention to the real optimism of the moment that we are in. And that is, what we are seeing is, with regard to our energy systems, that debate has been won, right? That we have to get off fossil fuels. And even, the CEO of Shell, I saw him a couple of months ago, the conversation is different. It's not what it was even 5 years ago where they were telling us, no, the science is wrong, the science is imperfect, blah, blah, blah. Now they say, we accept the science. However, let's try and stretch the industry out right till the end of the century, even though the science is telling us we have to get off those types of energy as soon as possible. The good news is, if we make this transition with energy and with enthusiasm, we can get a win for the environment and a win for everything else, because we can generate more jobs, we can generally study after study after study shows that if we got serious about making the transition to an economy that is driven on clean, green, renewable energy rather than an economy that is driven by brown, dirty, fossil fuel-based energy, if we did that, that the job creation potential, like for example, it means retrofitting all our buildings to make them energy efficient. We can have a boost in the construction industry. We're talking about a massive change in the energy industry. Again, millions of jobs that every country with substantial size can actually achieve. But to get there, we will need to add new tools to the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change. And one of it is also using strategic litigation. You'll see in the next 5 years, I predict a massive spike in governments and corporations being taken to court, where the argument will be that the government and corporations knew about the threat of climate change from 1992 at least, since the first Rio Earth Summit happened, and that they've dragged the feet and there has to be accountability. So right now in the Philippines, for example, the Philippines Human Rights Commission has a case against the top 50% of the fossil fuel companies, it's going to take years and years to resolve. And it doesn't even matter whether we win those court cases immediately, because we are in that moment of tobacco litigation, if you know what I mean. You know, when those first cases started, people said, they'll never win and so on. And eventually, they started having huge impact. So I want to just end with 2 points. One is, you know, often many governments, especially governments in the developing world, they say, no, if we're going to address climate change, we're going to destroy our economy and the workers will be upset and so on. But I want to say to you that the most powerful single sentence mentioned on climate didn't come from an environmentalist, came from a trade union leader. And I'll tell you the context. We were having a meeting with Ban Ki-moon on the occasion of Rio Plus 20 in 2012, and Ban Ki-moon had invited about 25 of the civil society leaders. I was there. Sharon Burrows, who Mary and I worked very close to, was there. And we were sitting outside waiting for the meeting, and she's even naughtier than me, so she said, let's swap notes. So I thought she meant, you know, we just read the notes, and she said, no, we go into the meeting, you speak of my speaking notes, and I'll speak of your speaking notes. So we go there, and we kind of more or less do that. And poor Ban Ki-moon, he's seeing this trade unions banging on about climate change. You can see he's moving his notes to see if he had been misbriefed, you know. And then she said to him, Secretary General, you might wonder why, as a trade unionist, my job is to fight for decent work, for workers' rights, better wages, and so on, that I am spending so much of time talking about climate. And she said, the reason for that, as a trade unionist, as a human being, and as a mother, she said, and this is the one sentence, there are no jobs on a dead planet. There are no jobs on a dead planet. And I want to say to you, from a human rights perspective, there's also no human right on a dead planet, because potentially, in the worst case scenario, there'll be no human beings on a dead planet either. So I don't want to end on such a negative note. So I want to end with a story, which is sad, but actually is intended to be inspirational, and I ask you to focus on the inspirational side. So when I was 22 years old, I was fleeing South Africa into exile, and my best friend at that time, a guy called Jilani Naidoo, asked me a question as we were arguing each other and fleeing in different directions out of the country. He said, Kumi, what is the biggest contribution we can make to the cause of humanity? So I said, that's a very easy question, giving your life. And he said, you mean going, participating in a demonstration, getting shot and killed and becoming a martyr, which was happening every other week in South Africa at that time. And often we would go to the funerals, and then people get killed at the funeral, and it was just a cycle like that. So he said to me, no, it's not giving your life. That's a wrong answer. He said, it's giving the rest of your life. I'll be honest with you, right? My friend Lenny was way ahead of us. He was the only one amongst us who understood environmental justice. I think at that time he was like only one of like 500, maybe 1,000 voluntary vegetarians on the entire African continent. I mean, the guy was ahead of his time. So I shrugged, left in different directions. 2 years later, I hear that my friend Lenny and 3 young women from our home city were brutally murdered by the apartheid regime. There were so many bullets in their bodies, their parents couldn't even recognize them at the mortuary. I, of course, had to think deep and hard about this distinction between giving your life versus giving the rest of your life. What he was saying was super profound. He was saying the struggle for justice, social justice, economic justice, gender justice, climate justice, all these struggles are marathons and they are not sprints. And therefore, those of us, like those in this room today, who have the privilege of understanding the issues, who have education, who have the capability to contribute, right? The biggest contribution we can make is to continue to push, to struggle, and to ensure that you give the rest of your life until those struggles have been won. To the young people here, I say to you, resist the notions about, I want to die for my country, or I want to die for this cause. You must want to live for your country. You must want to live for those causes. And that doesn't mean that we don't engage in civil disobedience and take risks and so on. But our mentality must be one of loving life, about caring for our fellow human beings, and about celebrating community. So I would like to end this lecture by saying there are very few people in the world that can stand up and say, ever since I understood there was injustice in the world, I have tried to work against those things. I've tried to give it the rest of my life. One of those people is Mary Robinson, and I am so glad, Mary, that you are in my life as personally, but I'm more happy that you're in the fight with us throughout the world. You know, in the black community, we have this thing, right, where, you know, every now and then, like, some sort of person tries to act a bit too white. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? So there's a word for that, like, you know, in different cultures, they call them Oreo cookies, which means, you know, Oreo cookies? It's black on the outside, white on the inside. So we were talking about this one, and this was in Africa in a conversation that was happening in Botswana. And somebody said, you know that Mary Robinson? She's like an opposite of an Oreo cookie, you know? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kumi. And okay, Mary Oriole Robinson. You wanted to just say one or two things before we start our discussion, so off you go.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. And thank you, Olivia, for being here yet again as moderator. I'm looking forward to our discussion. But I just first of all wanted to thank everybody for being here this afternoon, and especially those who've organised. And I won't go into names. There have been some naming and acknowledging of people. I just want to name one name, Emer Gilvari, because Emer has kept very close contact with me over this time. I know she would love to be here. I hope she might even be listening as I speak, because her heart is in this whole project, and she has given so much to it. And she's typical, actually, of the spirit of the project itself. She's not the only one, but she certainly does it with great determination and will and belief in the future, and I acknowledge that. But it's great to be back. It's great to be back for this series. You know, we had a very good lecture from Muhammad Yunus that was in the Manfalken Hotel, and I think not many people were able to come to it. It was kind of the first, and it was a great lecture, and anybody who was there, you know, felt very inspired by it. And then we had Graça Machel in the church, bigger thing. We had Hina Jilani here in the centre, and we had George Machel also in the church. I think each have been very inspiring. I think, Kumi, you have certainly lived up to the high standards that we've been able to maintain in these lectures. And I think that's important because it is a way of inspiring and conveying a real sense of the issues that we want to discuss, that we want to think about, that we want young people to be inspired by and think about. And I feel that although the centre itself hasn't yet become a living centre in a full sense, as it will, there's a great deal that has been achieved already in being able to know that with the help of Galway, and I again acknowledge we had a very good meeting last month with the president, with the librarian, with others, some who are here, who were very committed, and Emer was there at that meeting, to the fact that there will be an educational dimension, which I think is also very important, to the Mary Robinson Centre. So, Kumi, I love the way you talk about the climate issue, because you don't in any way take from the crisis dimension of it, the seriousness of it, but you also give that hope and that way forward, which I think is just so important. And now I think maybe we can talk further about that under your severe moderating, Olivia, as always.
But you know something, it struck me the power of example. We were coming down in the train this morning, and I was on the way back from Edinburgh. I stayed in Dublin in a hotel last night, and running out the door, I grabbed a bottle of water. It was a plastic bottle of water. I sat down on the train, and Mary had her lovely little reusable flask. And I sat there for 3.5 hours realizing there's no way I can take out my plastic bottle of water. It's hidden away, bottle of shame. It's hidden away down there. But Can we just talk about the application of this whole need to recognise what's happening to the planet and look at it vis-a-vis the political timetable? I remember at the end of the Greens and Fianna Fáil government, which ended in 2011. But before that, in fairness, the Green Party had managed to get the ESB to commit itself to really ambitious targets in terms of alternative energy. And there was a real feeling maybe that a lot of things could change, building regulations were changed or whatever. And then the real crash hit in. And suddenly, you know, the saving of the planet went down the agenda. And even in the recent election, when there were all sorts of forecasts that the Greens would do spectacularly well, the Greens did all right. But in fact, it was issues, immediate issues, like health, but particularly housing, which was the swing issue in the election, because people were trying desperately to manage a situation, young couples with young children, trying to pay dreadfully high rents, trying to get mortgages, whatever. You've been a politician, how does one actually bring it home, not just to politicians, but to the people who vote for them, that this is a crisis coming right down the tracks at us, and as Kumi said, you know, so movingly, at our children, at our precious children, the people that we try to protect all the time. And yet when it came to it, even in the recent election that the Greens did all right, it was not at the top of the agenda. Climate change was not at the top of the agenda. How?
Yes, you're right that climate change, the climate crisis, wasn't at the top of the agenda, and I did regret that. I felt somehow, I thought there was a higher level of awareness, and it was a little bit disappointing. But I do see change happening more rapidly than I had, you know, slightly feared, because we have a catching up to do. Our Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, did say in the European Parliament that we're a bit of a laggard on climate change, and we need to change. And we now have the Climate Action Plan. But I'm seeing it in different ways. I'm seeing it with the Chambers of Commerce, who have embraced the Sustainable Development Goals. I was at a meeting of the Chambers a couple of months ago, and it was really interesting to see how they were internalising. I was at a bigger meeting of the public sector on energy quite recently, and one of the things that I really appreciated is we have a great advantage of size in Ireland, and we should appreciate that. If we put our minds to it, there is nothing that is too difficult to do if we actually take the moment. And I found that at that energy conference, and I only got a flavour of it, but I really did get a flavour of it, there was a great buzz of networking, of what was happening, what were good practices, etc. Local authorities are beginning. Kinsale is a very good example. Kinsale is plastic free and is beginning to have a whole of town approach to going forward. Ballina could well have a whole of town approach. Universities, we were in Trinity yesterday, Kumi and myself. Trinity has had a series of green weeks, got the university to divest. You don't see any plastic around. You know, there's a real sense of, and now moving intellectually into what this means for creativity, innovation, jobs, the future, you know, in a very big way. So I think we shouldn't see this only as being the government's climate action plan and how that will be implemented. That is extremely important, and the levers of that are extremely important. And putting a price on carbon is vital, but it has to be done fairly, and we're getting there. And I'm very glad that there is one thing which gives me a lot of hope, having just come back from the United States. The climate issue is not a divisive issue in Ireland. In many ways, that may be why it wasn't such a big issue in the election, because it wasn't a divisive issue, whereas the issues of housing and health care were very much in the front of people's mind. But it's a good thing that it's not a divisive issue between the parties. It's a good thing that we have a sense of needing to move more quickly. I think that our membership of the European Union is going to drag us rather rapidly much further, because if we don't comply, we're going to pay huge fines, and it's stupid to pay fines when it's the right thing to do. So all of these things are moving in the right direction. But actually, I think that everybody has to get on board. And that's really, I think, our message. I believe that every single one of us has to take 3 steps. And the first step is to make the climate crisis, and do say climate crisis now, not climate change. Climate crisis or climate emergency or climate justice. Climate change is too neutral. Take the climate crisis personally in your life and do something to prove that. I've become a pescatarian. Be more energy efficient, whatever it takes. Use a bicycle instead of use public transport. Do something, because then you own the issue. You've recognized on behalf of our children and grandchildren in particular, yes, this is an issue that I'm going to do my bit on, whatever that bit will be. Done. The second step is to get angry and get active. Get angry about those who have much more responsibility, and that is governments across the board and at all levels, including in towns like Ballina. And get angry with those like the fossil fuel industry, agribusiness, transport, tourism, which are not doing enough to curb their emissions. And get active in supporting all the organizations that are working on the right side and creating awareness. And the third issue, and I think Kumi was touching on this when he was speaking, is we have to imagine this world that we need to be hurrying towards. I mean, the scientists have told us, and it's pretty stark. They said we had 12 years when they issued their report in October 2018, that we have to stay at 1.5 degrees of warming. Why did they say that? It was a new goal. It's the furthest we've actually committed. It went further than Paris. Paris said we had to stay well below 2 degrees and work for 1.5 degrees. But the scientists, having studied it at the request of the Paris Agreement, said, no, that's actually not enough, because between that band of time between 1.5 degrees and 2 degrees, bad things happen. The coral reefs will probably totally disappear. The Arctic ice will probably disappear. And the permafrost, and the huge amount of permafrost in our world, will melt. It's already melting, but it will melt hugely and throw up not just carbon, but methane. And then we're into Mother Nature perhaps changing and reversing from helping us with the oceans and the forests to be sinks into regurgitating and actually getting rid of us. And that is not a good scenario. The planet, as Kumi rightly said, will continue. So that's why they said...
It's all very depressing.
Yeah,
Isn't that the problem?
But this
that people will close their ears when there's an unrelenting list
but I have to say, think about it. Why is it that we're so ready to make really significant changes because of a coronavirus?
Yeah.
Because we really take it seriously. Because actually people can get very ill and some people can die from it and are dying from it, which is really very sad. But it means we're taking it seriously. What we have to do is get us all to take seriously, but not in a negative, downing way, because as Kumi rightly said, if you just see the negatives, you don't have the energy. You need the hope, you need and actually the scientists said it is doable if we have the political will, and that's the key, the political will.
Kumi, I mean, you sort of mentioned in passing the coronavirus, but putting this as compared with the coronavirus, put the two in context for us in terms of what we're facing.
Well, the Kofi Annan Foundation already in 2009, when the climate negotiations in Copenhagen, brought out a study that year saying that the previous year already about 500,000 deaths you could directly attribute to climate impacts, right? If we take one extreme weather event in, say, Pakistan, in 2010, where there was a massive flooding, totally unexpected and totally way off the charts, 20 million people were displaced. Just try and imagine that. That's what, 5 times the size of Ireland, right, population-wise, right? Where I come from in Southern Africa, last year, and by the way, in Southern Africa, for all my living memory, I don't remember us having typhoons and cyclones. And then last year, we get Cyclone Idai, it was called, hitting Mozambique, Malawi, and Zimbabwe, but mainly Mozambique, right? If any of you know the city of Beira, it was completely flattened, completely flattened. People lost their lives in large numbers, but their livelihoods were completely devastated. So with coronavirus, I can tell you right now, the scale of the number of lives coronavirus could take, even on the worst case predictions of what the WHO is saying, won't come anywhere near the lives already taken by climate change, and certainly does not pose a kind of threat. That doesn't mean we mustn't take coronavirus seriously, just to be clear, right? But there's opportunity, right, in how we now address the climate question, right? Because if we think that the climate threat is unrelated to health, then we have to wake up and smell the coffee, right? If you look at what's happening in the medical fraternity right now, the medical fraternity have set up their own climate and health kind of initiative, right? So we are seeing in Africa, for example, the re-emergence of diseases in certain countries that we thought we had, dealt with. So we need to understand they are linked, right? Disease and climate will be linked, because think about it, water, right? Water we need for good health. And we don't just need water, we need good, clean water. There are millions of people in this world. Actually, there are tens of millions of people in the world that don't have access to clean. They might have access to water, but they don't have access to clean water. So I just want to urge us that the way we think about the solutions, we cannot think about single solutions for single sets of challenges. We have to look at how the different challenges are connected together, and we need to be coming up with solutions that speak to the improvement of health, the more safer, employment for people, and a range of other positive things need to be integrated into it if we are going to stand a chance. And I just would conclude by saying, right, and what you said in response to Mary, but Mary, that sounds so depressing. That takes me to how I started about I have a nightmare story, right, rather than I have a dream. But Olivia, this is the challenge for us, right? Because I don't want to be in a situation where all of us, our children tell us 5 years from now, you'll had Mary Robinson's lecture there and so on, and you were talking about the issue, but actually you lied to us. You all actually didn't tell us what the science was telling. Let's be clear, the science are telling us, sorry, I'm going to take a chance and use an Afrikaans sentence here. Afrikaans is derived from the Dutch language. People at home, we say, like in Afrikaans, we say, ons is deep, deep, deep in the kak. I think you can figure that out, right? And we're sinking in it, right? And so we can't say we have evolved over time, we've accumulated all this knowledge and intelligence and so on, and then the science says, okay, when the science says wear seatbelts, we go wear seatbelts. If the science says wear a condom to prevent sexually transmitted disease, we do that. On thousands of things, what the science says we do in our lives. And now the science is telling us, you've got to change your energy system, you've got to change your food system, you've got to change how you share resources on a finite planet, and we say, okay, we'll think about it. That's not good enough.
But can I just raise one or two things? Sometimes, perhaps people feel that the price of paying for a cleaner world, a better world, too often falls on the people who are least able to pay. I'm not simply talking, as you quite rightly have, Kumi, about the people who have their homes swept away in floods and whatever. But the issue here of turbary rights, I was explaining on the way down that people who've had traditional rights that go way back to cut their own turf, and suddenly the European Union is saying you can't do that for a series of reasons, mostly to do with climate change. And it becomes a political issue in a particular constituency, and political parties maybe go easy on the issue, or if they don't, somebody gets in who runs as an independent. The increase in taxes on carbon, and it will often hit people down the country who don't have the alternative of decent public transport and need the car to get to work. That, very often it's the people, naturally enough, who are least able to pay for it, who say, why me? I'm at the end of the chain. Why do I have to pay?
Absolutely. So maybe if I can just jump ahead on this question. Right? absolutely valid question, and that is why Mary has played a key role in this. Many of us have supported it, because why is the trade union movement today a central part of the struggle to avert catastrophic climate change? I remember a time when we used to talk about red-green tensions, right? Red-green tensions, we're talking about the tension between labor and environmentalism, right? Now we're talking about red-green alliances. One of the most powerful voices in the climate fight is, in fact, the trade union movement. And Mary played a big role in this, and I want to acknowledge it, which is what we started talking about was not simply a transition to a new economy. We started saying what we need is a just transition to a different kind of world. And then specifically, what we are saying is the workers, the men and women who work in the oil, coal, and gas industry, for example, and Pete, for example, they are our brothers and sisters, right? They are our families. We don't want them to be punished, right? Because let's be blunt about it. Everything that we are able to do with our lives, those people enable us to do it because they were told this is the energy system that, you should do. So what we are saying is that young workers, governments need to train them to make sure they have the skills to be able to operate in a new energy world. Older workers, governments must take responsibility to ensure that they can be paid a decent pension and can transition and so on. And the good news is some of the core sets of skills involved in the fossil fuel industry actually are transferable, not lock, stock, and barrel, but with a little bit of adaptation. So and thank you, Olivia, for saying this, because already in practice, what you saw happening in France last year with the yellow vests, that was exactly the problem that Macron did, which was they were getting the poor, right, to take the largest share of the burden of addressing some of the climate commitments.
Okay, can I turn to the audience? Is there anybody who would like to ask a question?
4 years ago, we were the first local authority to actually set up a climate action team within the local authority system, and we're lead for the regional response to it. And our challenge at this stage, I think, is trying to imagine a way in which we can get an economic model which tilts in one way to change so that we can, instead of painting a picture of gloom and doom, paint a picture of an alternative future where there are jobs, there is opportunity, there is prosperity, not richness, but prosperity and equity. Yeah. And the question is, where do we look to see that inspiration on a world stage? Not the leadership to get us to go there, but where the models and the recalibration of an economic model that's broken.
Mary?
I think it's a switch in investment will be extraordinarily important. A switch in investment from investing in fossil fuel, which is harming us, to investing in the clean energy. And that's with the just transition that Kumi rightly and importantly spoke about. And the European Green New Deal has a very big fund now for just transition. That's new and very important that that's being factored into what the European Union will be doing going forward. But the switch in investment is really important. And the truth is that investment in renewable energy actually fell off a bit in the last few years. Didn't increase the way we thought it should. And that has not been helpful. And that also includes, as I understand it, here in Ireland. We need that switch to be really serious and move much more rapidly. And that will affect the oil and gas companies, and again, the just transition of the workers in the oil and gas companies. Kumi mentioned Shell. BP, under an Irishman, who's now the head of BP, is talking seriously. Now, he's getting a lot of criticism. There's a lot of suspicion about an oil company. Will it really? But I think it's a new language. I think there is the beginning of and we need that.
In terms, and I'm not going away from your point, in terms of getting licenses and permission, for instance, for anything from wind farms to wave energy or whatever, are local authorities aware enough of being ready to grant permission or to make it clear that such a project would be welcome?
And to talk about the advantages, to make it a conversation that is a very positive conversation about how important it is that we use our potential of wind in particular and other forms of clean energy to move. Also, there is a lot of new innovation. I went to the Glen Dimplex Centre in Dunleer to see the research that they were doing there on ways of heating houses that got away from fossil fuel. And it is incredible how efficient it can be. Yes, the trouble is there's an initial investment, and it's how to work out getting that initial investment for households and for buildings so that we can change. I mean, our buildings are significantly responsible for our emissions at the moment. They're a significant part.
This new passive house idea is terrific.
Can I mean, I just wanted to talk about something else on the more optimistic side that's happening, that's very important as far as I'm concerned. And that is women leaders are beginning to really take this issue seriously. And the reason I say that is women leaders in Africa have been taking it seriously for years. Women leaders in Asia have been taking it pretty seriously because the effects, it's just natural that you would take it seriously. Women in Europe and the United States would talk eloquently about Me Too issues, discrimination issues, violence against women, very knowledgeable about education of girls, even on a global scale, knew how many girls were out of school on a global scale. Health, very knowledgeable about health. Climate, didn't know how to talk about it. That has begun to really change. I have become, in the last year, a fearless woman, a connected woman, and a dangerous woman. Different groups of women actually rallying a bit round the byline of the podcast, that climate change is a man-made problem and requires a feminist solution. And I often explain that man-made is generic, of course. We're all responsible. And a feminist solution includes as many men as possible. And on my podcast, we normally have women, but Kumi is one of two good men that we've had on our podcast so far.
I was very nervous, by the way.
But,
And you were right.
but the point I'm making is women have got this sense of the finite time we have. And I'm going tomorrow to London, and I'll be taking part in a big event, a WOW event, and it's all about climate and climate justice and urgency. Yeah. That would not have happened even a year ago.
Okay, anybody else who wants to come in? Machel.
Thank you. Just, I suppose, a general point, and that is the whole issue of anger and people getting angry about an issue. But I feel that we have to be constructive how we deal with anger, and maybe just some thoughts on the fact that, you know, Greta Thunberg represents for young people this voice, but there's a lot of anger there, and I would have a concern that it's projected in a very simplistic way that an older generation isn't really that bothered about the next generation, and that there's a division and that there's an anger, to me in many ways, that is not constructive, because some of it is unrealistic. For example, you go to a school, you see kids sitting with single-use plastics. They don't walk to school, they don't cycle to school, but they think that somebody should stop cutting their turf for domestic use. So again, what I'm saying is that people aren't maybe looking at themselves, which is something that you say. The other anger is there's a lot of anger towards farmers. And I think it's unfair based on the steps that our own Irish farmers have taken to be more carbon efficient in the production of beef and dairy, and are world leaders in many senses. And we need people who are producing carbon efficient food. So the full story isn't told. And then there's another anger, which I think goes back to what you said, Olivia, which is we set targets going back to the 2000s. We have the best wind resource in Europe. We have the best wave energy in Europe. Yet, why haven't we achieved them? It's because there's anger among the public also when you want to build a wind farm, when you want to build transmission infrastructure. Yeah. And this cannot be ignored. And yet, everybody agrees at a high level at the Paris Agreement. But it's when you come down on the ground that these are issues, and there's an awful lot of anger about it. And in my view, we can see the urgency, but in many ways, it is a very difficult thing to ram through, and I'm not suggesting it would, because we are in a democracy. But I think that the dialogues often happen in places like this, where you have people who are already interested in a topic. Richard Bruton, the minister, hosted in the GMIT a conversation with stakeholders in renewable energy, and everybody there was so enthusiastic, and as you said, Mary, so many ideas about how we change, how we innovate.
But Machel, we have a Taoiseach who said that there were upsides to global warming, that it meant that we had a better climate and that the hospitals weren't as full of people with winter bugs. Now, I think he probably said it tongue-in-cheek, but I thought it was a shocking thing for him to say at a time when we're dealing with a crisis. And you know, that's what I mean about taking things seriously.
I don't want to be jumping in again, but my point is about how we deal with this. We can all be very existential and think about at a high level, yes, we should achieve this, and not find ways and means to engage with the guys with the yellow vests on the ground, and that's not happening. And in all fairness, the Taoiseach and I sat on the Climate Action Committee. We had hearings for 7 months where we produced a document that's the foundation of the Climate Action Plan. I definitely feel that there's a gap, and I think that the National Economic and Social Council came up with a report and said the biggest issue with the delivery of renewable energy, wind, wave, biomass, whatever, is public acceptance.
Yes.
So the thing is that public have to engage
that conversation
across the board,
has to
and
happen.
not because it's been pushed on them.
Okay, fair point. Was there anybody else? Yeah, see a hand up there, yes?
Thanks.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, in response to that, and then maybe I can ask a question, but I'm from the university in Galway and we do some research, but one problem with the community issues, and in response to Machel and also what this lady is saying, is it's at the time you bring in the community into the conversation, and it's way too late all the time. It's people sitting around, often grey-haired men in suits, making decisions, coming up with plans, then going to the community and say, here's what we're going to do now, how do we get buy-in? You got to get the community on board day one before you ever make a decision. Ask them what they want, how they think about it, and bring them on the journey with you, or else you're absolutely wasting your time. And then if we want to move away from that issue, the question that I did want to ask is, when we try to imagine a new future, and it's a very difficult thing to do, to imagine a different world, etc. And I would like to hear the opinion of the panel on what they think of capitalism as the dominant economic ideology, and what maybe might be alternatives to capitalism.
Okay. Okay, that's grand. That's a big one. Kumi, can I throw that one to you? Yeah. Capitalism and the extent, perhaps, to which it is responsible for the climate crisis we're in.
I have a daughter who is my biggest critic, and believe it or not, she thinks I'm a wishy-washy liberal, more or less. And she works for an organization called the Financial Sustainability Lab, and they are asking the question that you've posed to us, which is what kind of economic system that we need to ensure that we can live sustainably and into the future. And I think that question is not an easy answer, but what we need to acknowledge are a few things. One is that there's no question that the current economic system has driven us to this point, not only on climate and environmental collapse, but also in terms of the deepening inequality that we see in the world. And let's be very clear that if we don't address the reduction in inequality, we don't have the resources to approach the problem the way you said about bringing in communities and so on. So I have no doubt in my mind that this is a moment for serious imagination. I don't know what that new economy will look like, but it needs to bring in women more. It needs to, for example, not put all your eggs in the centralized big infrastructure approach, right? Because actually, if you look at energy systems, for example, decentralized energy provision is actually where we need to be going, because a lot of money, a lot of energy gets wasted or lost in the transmission process from centralized grids and all of that, right? And so right now, if you think about it, in Africa, for example, we don't even need big centralized grids. We've been arguing with our governments, turn every roof of every home, every school, every religious institution, and so on into two things. One, an electricity generator by putting panels, but also as an income generator for that family or that school or that religious institution, because if you feed the excess grid energy that you generate into the grid, as is happening in many countries around the world, by the way, then you get a rebate for what you feed in. So we need that kind of thinking. I think the problem here is, like, for example, I don't generally say we need to end capitalism, we need to da-da. What I just generally say is the current economic system is problematic. It's got us to the point we need to change it. We need to change it fundamentally. Because I think right now, what is capitalism? What is communism? I mean, the Chinese government is the fastest growing capitalist economy, and supposedly they're communist, right? So let's be clear that these terms today are so complicated in the current usage that they actually, because basically we don't have capital.
But surely, Kumi, one of the things that one could look at is this inevitable emphasis on growth and more growth and more growth and more growth without questioning it at all. And I mean, there might be some people who would say that the coronavirus crisis we're facing right now, because indeed it may well slow down world growth, that maybe is not a bad thing. And, that may sound a bit heretical, but in many ways that emphasis on just endless growth has been a bit thoughtless.
Olivier's answer was much better than mine. No, seriously. No, seriously. That one sentence puts the finger, she puts the finger on the pulse of the issue, right? Because,
But, I mean, what we're actually talking about, and I know it's a bit abstract in one sense, is the Sustainable Development Goals, which talk about production and consumption that we have to change. Yeah. And it's, I mean, on the community involvement, I think there is a possibility of engaging communities around the country in a way that uses the model of the tidy towns. Do you remember how the tidy towns cleaned up the countryside? I remember giving the prize. To the village of Malin in the Inishowen Peninsula, maybe because my mother came from Inishowen, but anyway, and the excitement in that small village to be the overall winner, the way it's graded. I think the tidy towns has deepened a bit on sustainability, but not enough. And if, Peter, you're saying that Mayo as a county is really emphasising sustainability, inclusiveness, etc., then it's a matter of bringing people with you in a very significant way. I think that's a key.
I'm going to take a last question. Yes, yourself. Yeah.
I'm actually the chairman of the community cleanup, and I'm kind of agreeing with what Mary said, that we're collecting litter every week and the town is really tidy. We're actually getting to the sustainability part and we're getting a bit stuck, but with this new initiative, Believe in Ballina, so if you bring the flower, you bring the bee. And I just talking to Kumi, I study law as well, and if you look back to Aristotle, he believed in normative force, and you move on to Pufendorf, and in Nazi Germany got it wrong and everyone got killed, and they came out of the phoenix out of the ashes, where human rights were a basic premise. So I think human rights comes into sustainability. So if everyone in the community goes out every Saturday and thinks about ways of being sustainable and get the marrow to grow the meat, so literally that we can all work together as a community. And I believe, I just want to ask Kumi's advice on that from a kind of a mindset rather than to live the doom and gloom. Because inherently I think we're all a bit frightened about the statistics. Could we not just imagine what we could do rather than accept the doom?
Absolutely, and I'm just, as well as your point, I'm going to take, you yourself. I'm determined to let you speak. Come on.
Thank you very much. In listening to a lot of the work that's going on with sustainability and the climate crisis, there's going to be, I think, a need soon for a seriously different mindset in terms of who's deserving of all of this. There's that train of thought of, the thinkers and the activists and what have you, and where you're putting these decisions are being made of where these things might happen, and who reaps the benefits. When the wind turbines first started coming, it really had more to do with an interconnector to send energy to the continent. It wasn't for Ireland, it wasn't for lower bills in Ireland, but the people kind of rose up. The farmers were concerned. What is this going to do to my animals, my children, where I live, my home place? So it seems a lot of times there's good thoughts to these changes, the fundamental changes that we have to make, but who's really making the decisions on who is actually going to be benefiting from this? If you're selling solar panels or photovoltaic panels to people who are remodeling, why aren't those projects going to be going to social housing first? Why aren't they being insulated first? And senior housing and disabled housing first? I mean, there just doesn't seem to be a really well-joined thought or plan into who will really benefit from this besides the people who
And
are the manufacturers.
What's the purpose of economic growth?
Who's going to be trained? Who will do the work?
Yeah,
And
very,
where?
very good point. Kumi, just quickly to you on, in fact, both of those points, the point about community involvement and consultation, and making sure that the economy serves a society rather than business or big corporations.
Well, I agree fully with you. Only the last thing that you said, I have a slight different way of saying it. I don't think we need more discussion and conversation. I think we need to actually have plans and implement. It's not rocket science, quite frankly, that we should have a simple thing that those that are most excluded in society, that they should be those that are brought into, because bear in mind that one of the worst deprivations that people on this planet live with is that about 1.6 billion people in this planet don't have access to a single light bulb. Can you think what that means for those people's life? Food, children's education, can't read the prescription from the doctor, at night and all of those things. So we have to bring the community, I don't like to talk like this because it's who are we? Because I don't see myself completely outside of community, right? So that phrase, bring the community, almost often makes us seem like we're not part of the community, but because also understand the community, one of the most abused terms in the world, I would say, is way ahead of our governments in many cases. On climate, if you look at it on a global scale, right? Maybe it's different in Ireland, and some parts of Europe, but in most countries around the world, certainly the United States, the citizenry are, way ahead of the politicians. But in how we do this, there are two things I think we need to keep in mind. And one is I'd like to channel Albert Einstein here, when he said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting to get different results. But that definition, most politicians, most business people, and sadly to say most NGO people, all meet the definition of insanity, right? And because basically, I think we need to recognize also that the supply chain of corruption is much shorter and thinner in renewable energy projects, for example, than it is with big oil, coal, gas, nuclear projects, right? So what is needed also is much more transparency, coming to your question, on what resources are available, who's making the decision, how those decisions are being made, and how the beneficiation of that is distributed. And right now, you're right.
Mary, just wanted to put a quick question to you, because it was something both yourself and Kumi talked about this morning, and we'll end on this point. You both had young women coming to you saying, I'm not going to bring a child into a world where what looks like a hellish future is ahead of them. And I thought it was one of the saddest things that I ever heard. This happens to you all the time.
It doesn't happen all the time, but it's happened too often, at least a dozen times in the last year, that different young women in different parts of the world, I have to say, have come up to me and said, I love what you're doing about climate justice. I've just decided I'm not going to have any children because I can't bring them into this world. And it breaks my heart as a grandmother, needless to say, that would be an actual decision taken. But The reality is, and if you'll allow me, Olivia, because I think I want to get this point across, we do need to change our habits. You were pointing to this a little bit, and I wanted to pursue it a bit. We need to get away from the throwaway society. That's a bad globalization habit we got into. Cheap goods that we throw away. Single-use things that we throw away. We know now about plastic, but there's so much throwaway. We need to get into a circular economy where there's no waste if possible. We are seeing moves in that direction, but we also need to get into slow food, slow fashion. I actually love the idea of another elder whom I learned a lot from. Ela Bhatt is a wonderful woman from India. She's like a female Gandhi. And she's retired now from the elders, but we're still in touch. And she kept saying in our elders meetings, why do we eat food produced more than 100 miles away? It's a very good question. It's a very good question.
And it's a question that I'm going to leave hanging because I've run over. What?
I'd like to take a point that Mary made earlier on about Ballina having a whole of town approach.
Yeah.
And we listened to the conversations here, and Kumi just said there, we need to start doing something. Can I suggest, I'm here representing the Chamber of Commerce.
Yeah.
Can I suggest that we set up an initiative here today, March 6th, on the occasion of the 5th lecture, to explore and get something moving around that subject, so that if Ballina can't do it, with your inspiration and maybe you as an ambassador, and we might recruit Kumi in to join us as well, I think it's worth exploring, and I think it might fit nicely with what Peter's doing too.
Yeah.
And it could be ready for launch on the official opening of the Mary Robinson Centre.
And on that note, I'm going to hand over to Derek Leonard to finish proceedings. Derek.
Thank you. Well, dear friends, that was some wow of an event. Where in the world, except in Ballina, would you get such fine discourse from our primary guest, Kumi Naidoo, our very own Mary Robinson, and our constant compere, the kind Olivia O'Leary. Let's give them a serious round of applause. As Olivia said, my name is Derek Leonard, and I'm a member of the Victoria House Foundation Board, and I'm also a member of the local community committee. The Mary Robinson Centre, as Peter quite rightly said, is not a museum. It is a centre for change with a focus on human rights, gender equality, and climate justice. A place where conversation, such as we had today, can take place, where we can welcome global leaders to share their experience and insight, educating and engaging at the heart of our community. At this point, the project is in an exciting phase. The past 6 months have seen very significant developments take place. The Mary Robinson Centre Archive is at the National University of Ireland at Galway, and cataloguing of the archive is well underway. Digitising of the archive will start towards the end of this year, and as the material is digitised, it will be available online both in Ballina and in Galway for students to access and to use. The redevelopment of Victoria House itself is also underway, and we expect to open the doors in the middle part of 2021. I would like to thank some people here today. The musicians who entertained us on the way in the lobby, the Girl Guides and the Girls of St. Mary's for their Guard of Honour, Cahorla Michael Loftus from Ballina Municipal District, the board of the Victoria House Foundation and its chair Emer Gilvary, the local Mary Robinson Centre Committee, the Lions Club, the Ballina Gardaí and others who have helped in preparing this event. Ballina Arts Centre, Gillian Marsh TV, Shane Walkin and Liam Brennan, and Ballina Tidy Towns for their work last night outside. Peter Hines and Mayo County Council, and NUI Galway as project partners of the Mary Robinson Centre. The Department of Culture, Heritage and the Gaeltacht for committing €2 million to the project, an important development to bring the project to this point. And to Senator Machel Mulhern and Dara Cleary TD and all our elected representatives for the support in securing that funding and championing our project at a national level. Thank you to the very many local individuals and businesses who have pledged support for this project, and we look forward to your continued support. Special thank you to our guests Kumi Naidoo, Olivia O'Leary and Mary Robinson for making this day possible. I would like to also acknowledge Mary and Nick and the Robinson family for believing in the project and for committing her precious archive to Victoria House and for the benefit of her hometown. I would like to call Michael Loftus, Georgia Murphy and Willie Crichton to present gifts to our guests. Georgia and Michael will present paintings from local artist Trish Slowey. And Willie Crichton is going to present to Mary a bowl which he handcrafted himself. For those of you who don't know, Willie is a master craftsman. And on the bottom of the bowl, it's inscribed, presented to Mary Robinson at Ballina on the 6th of March 2020 in honour of the 5th International Human Rights Lecture by Kumi Naidoo. The chestnut bowl was created, as I say, by Willie himself.
Okay, good. That's lovely. Thank you very much indeed. Yeah, yeah, good. Okay. Are we finished?
Due to time constraints and due to, obviously, the coronavirus, normally Mary would sit and greet everybody as they leave the auditorium, but time, unfortunately, is not with us, and we will not be engaging today. And I am aware that we can never have enough discourse or enough discussion about the challenges that the Earth faces. So I'm openly inviting all of you now to attend at the Great National Hotel at 6 p.m. sharp, where Mary Robinson herself will give the inaugural address to the International Lions Club gathering. I know it will be a fascinating further insight, and as a point of knowledge and at a point of history, it is important that we all be there. Please do attend. There are lots of parking out there, but make sure that you're there before 6 p.m. Very many thanks to you all, and we'll see you at 6 p.m.